Hello and welcome, viewers. We have just witnessed a historic visit by US House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. Taiwan, a country with whom China prohibits others from having formal relations, a country which China has coveted for a long time, actually considers to be a part of its own mainland, but is very annoyed with the fact that it is a democratic country that is succeeding, whereas it has its own structures that it would like to implement in Taiwan as well. We are being joined today to discuss this by Matt Abbott, who is the Director of Government and Diplomatic Programs at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Matt, thank you for joining us. First off, I would ask for your first impressions on this visit. It may have taken the world a little bit by surprise. We are still coming to terms with it. What does it symbolize to you?
Ankit, thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today. I really appreciate it. My first impression is that this is a real opportunity for Speaker Pelosi to show support for Taiwan. Even without official diplomatic relations, Taiwan and the United States have maintained robust cultural and economic ties dating back for decades. This is a real opportunity for her to show the American commitment to democratic values and human rights.
Okay, fair enough. And the mention of democracy and autocracy was everywhere to be seen in her statements and the things she said. And America has gone around the world essentially to sort of propagate democracy. But Matt, would you not say that this also has a wider geopolitical, geostrategic ramification, because China is none too happy with this visit?
It is very much so. The Chinese government has long been sensitive about contact with Taiwan, especially by US politicians. I will say, though, that this is not a deviation from previous US policy or actions. A sitting Speaker of the House in the United States, Newt Gingrich, visited Taiwan 25 years ago. For decades, there have been dozens of these congressional member and staff delegations that have visited the island. And this year alone, at least 7 sitting US senators have visited Taiwan, including the chairman of the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
But, you know, very rarely has a visit been accompanied by so much rhetoric by China. In fact, we were surprised to see there were some American reports doing the rounds about China perhaps posing a danger to Nancy Pelosi's flight while she was making her way to Taiwan. So with China clearly very riled up, warning Joe Biden, in fact, to not play with fire, do you think that, was it worth the attempt? Was it worth the risk?
I think there's a strong case to be made both for and against the visit. China's already responded quite forcefully. First, leading up to the visit, there was a strong response through rhetoric. Chinese officials were speaking out very forcefully and publicly. The day of her visit, before her plane landed, there were reports that Chinese military aircraft flew close to the median line of the Taiwan Strait. Already, we're seeing an escalation where Chinese military exercises are being planned. They've summoned the United States ambassador. They've halted several agricultural imports from Taiwan. That said, it is a unique opportunity for the speaker to reinforce that American commitment to democratic values and human rights. As I mentioned before, Taiwan's an important trading partner for the United States. It's been an important partner even without those official diplomatic relations. So this was a chance for the speaker and her delegation to reinforce those values.
Fair enough, but you see now Taiwan is located about 100 kilometers off China's coast, whereas America is on the other side of the Pacific. While America continues to back democracy across the world, do you not think that you have given China an opportunity to saber rattle further, perhaps given it an opportunity to escalate its enveloping of Taiwan, if you will, with its own security forces?
Well, I think the Chinese government's going to act according to what it perceives its interests to be, and they may frame any actions they take after this visit as a catalyst, as the visit being a catalyst for it. But ultimately, I expect any decisions they make to escalate would have been made in the context of a broader strategy, not a hasty reaction to a congressional delegation, just one of dozens that have taken place over the decades. It's by no means the first this has happened for a Speaker of the House. I also say we can't discount the agency of the 23 million Taiwanese people here. It's important to hear their viewpoint, ensure that this is something that is of value to them, and especially within their own democracy on the island of Taiwan.
No doubt. And, you know, India has its own issues with China, and so do China's other neighbors. And in this context, America has really escalated. The previous administration as well as the Biden administration have escalated their own, say, war of words or a war of actions with China. But let's put this in the context of the war in Ukraine, for instance. We already have one invasion that is taking place. It's gone on for 5 months right now. Do you think the world, and by that I mean the other countries that are not America, that are not China, can afford to be sitting on this kind of tinderbox where the two big superpowers are poised for some kind of conflict or some kind of face-off?
I'm particularly concerned about any miscalculations or miscommunications. I think a lot of countries around the world don't necessarily want to make the choice between working with the United States or working with China. Many of them are economically intertwined, politically intertwined with both countries. That said, right now, especially as the United States is framing this as between democracy and autocracy, there are going to be some very challenging choices to be made in the coming months and years. And I do think things like the Quad will be an important forum for India, Japan, Australia, and the United States to further reinforce that commitment to democracy and stand together in the face of any sort of threat coming with you.
Fair enough, fair enough. A question, however, to you is on this 1979 pact that America has with Taiwan, essentially the provision where it would ride to Taiwan's aid if there was any kind of military action against it. Earlier, we have seen Joe Biden making a commitment and then someone having to water it down in many ways. Do you think that America stands by its commitment to defend Taiwan militarily, apart from just support it democratically?
Absolutely. So by law, the United States is obligated under the Taiwan Relations Act to provide defensive weaponry to the Taiwanese. However, for decades, we've maintained a policy of strategic ambiguity over whether American troops would actually be committed to the invasion of Taiwan. Despite some of those statements from President Biden and when his staff walked some of those back, I don't think there's been a change in official U.S. policy right now. I think we are still committed to that strategic ambiguity. And I think the United States is still maintaining those robust economic and cultural relations with Taiwan. Like I said, this visit certainly does not mark a departure from historic U.S. policy. With 7 sitting U.S. senators visiting this year alone, dozens of other congressional delegations over the decades, this is something that is not unique.
Do you expect China to, at some point, calm down, or do you think this is an opportunity, particularly with Xi Jinping perhaps running for office for life? Do you think this is an opportunity for them to have some sort of paradigm shift in how they relate with Taiwan, with U.S. and the world?
It comes at a very sensitive time with the Chinese Communist Party's 20th Congress this fall. That said, I don't think any major strategic decisions are going to be based on this speaker's visit. Like I said, those decisions were already made. It might be framed with this visit as a catalyst or perhaps some additional congressional delegations in the future, or other U.S. actions. But I do think this is a very sensitive time with U.S.-China relations. It's been a long time coming. The past several years have been a very challenging time in the relationship. So I think there have been some very senior level discussions within both the Chinese leadership and the American leadership about what that future relationship is going to look like. And we're going to be seeing that play out over the coming weeks and months.
Last couple of questions now. Many of America's critics would be, I think, correct to hold an opinion that the US enters a lot of war, or it could perhaps embolden other countries to enter a state of war or to be provocative to their larger, closer neighbors. But when that conflict happens, sometimes America is unable to help find a decisive end to it or to commit itself fully. Like, for instance, with Ukraine, that war is ongoing. America's biggest support has been to supply weapons to it in an effort to have the Ukrainians beat back the Russians or to prevent their advances. If Taiwan is to visit some similar kind of situation, would it again be correct then to pin it to America?
Well, I think right now we're still seeing that policy of strategic ambiguity play out. I think it's important for the American government not to say definitively, and I think that will keep the Chinese government guessing and hopefully deter them from any sort of provocative action. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what our concern should be the 23 million lives on the island of Taiwan, their self-determination, their ability to lead their lives peacefully and in prosperity. And I think to the
I,
extent
I
we can
agree
do
with
that
you on the
through robust
23
economic-
million people, but unless the Americans have some intelligence that we are not aware of, that there is a imminent danger right now to the 23 million inhabitants of Taiwan. Could one say that, there is a fire that has been lit in Afghanistan, there is a fire that has been lit in Ukraine? Why now would you go to Taiwan and court your biggest potential challenger, China, who is just a couple of hours away from Taiwan's coast, whereas you are much further away?
Excellent question. I will say that because of the separation of powers in the United States, the executive branch, which is setting our foreign policy, doesn't dictate what the speaker can and cannot do, where she can and cannot travel. So ultimately, this was a decision made by the legislative branch of the United States, which has a lot of oversight over American foreign policy, but is not setting that foreign policy. And I think it's important to make that distinction, especially when discussing this with the Chinese side, that this is not something that is coming from the executive branch. This is not something that's being set by President Biden. Obviously, there were some comments from the administration before the visit expressing some concern about it. But at the end of the day, this was a personal decision made by the Speaker of the House and in consultation with the partners in Taiwan.
Matt, last question to you. Many people have spoken about American politics possibly having a role in Nancy Pelosi choosing to visit, or the Biden administration okaying this visit, even though you say that there are totally different decision-making processes involved. We don't want to get too far into American politics, but is that at all true? And then do you think that there should be a ramification to world affairs based on what American politicians are doing and their struggles with their vote banks and so on and so forth?
Well, the American midterm elections are coming up in November, so there's certainly a lot of attention being paid to that. I will say that it's been very interesting to track the number of Republican politicians, though, who have actually expressed support for the speaker's visit. And I think that's something worth noting. In this very politically polarized time in Washington, D.C., to have Republican members coming out in support of something the speaker is doing is actually quite interesting and quite unique. And I think it speaks broadly to that bipartisan support that Taiwan has enjoyed on Capitol Hill for decades.
And my final question, what would your advice be to the American ambassador in Beijing?
I think it's important to maintain all channels of communication right now. What I'm most worried about is a miscalculation and miscommunication. Ambassador Burns is a skillful diplomat. He's someone with a very distinguished track record in the United States. And I have full confidence in his ability to coordinate with his partners in China and ensure that that transparency and that active communication prevent any future escalations.
Right. Fair enough there. Matt Abbott from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs answering all our questions in India about Nancy Pelosi, US House of Representatives Speaker's visit to Taiwan in the face of China's warnings and China's saber rattling and their muscular foreign policy imposition on different countries. Thank you so much, Matt, for speaking to us here in India.
Ankit, thanks so much for having me. Have a great day.